What's up, relentless students? Dakota here, coming at you with part two of our "Can I Ask That" series. So first, before we get into that, how are you guys doing? Let me know below. I'm really curious what's going on with you guys. What's the most exciting thing that you've done during this time? How are you keeping positive? What's going on? For me, it's going pretty good. It's a little weird being at home as much as I am. I do get to see my little guy Ezra a lot more. I even get to see my wife a lot more. It's nice in that regard. It's definitely a lot slower pace, and it's definitely not as um, active as I would want it to be. I'm not somebody who sits at home normally, so that part's really hard for me. I don't know about you guys. I got crazy enough I decided to actually cut my own hair because there was no place open. So I mean, there's that. But yeah, what's up with you guys? What's new? What's exciting? For those of you who don't know, my kiddo just turned a year old too, so that's pretty cool, right? So with that in mind, guys, comment below what's going on with you. But let's dive in. So can I ask that part too? So last week we talked about can we trust the Bible? And we asked, is there truth in the Bible? With the way it was written, can we trust it? And asking these really important questions, right? And we came to the conclusion that yes, we can trust it because we see signs that there was more intentionality with it than with other ancient texts, as well as the fact that we know that it's God inspired. And we can see that through the way that it was preserved, even through the translations up till now, right? So with that in mind, guys, we have another really interesting question for today. One that maybe some of you guys have asked yourselves, one that friends may have asked you as well. And that question is, does the Bible contradict itself? So we're going to jump in. Like I said, does the Bible contradict itself? And so this is a topic that for a lot of us immediately we go, well, no, it doesn't contradict itself. But let's take a step back. All right, let's not be defensive about this. Let's really ask, does the Bible contradict itself? Because you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of people out there who say it does, and they're going to come to you and they're going to point out certain passages, and you have to be aware of what's going on so that way you can respond. And so we're asking this question. So let's dive in. One of the biggest things is that there's differences in some of the stories, right? And so we have these different books that portray the exact same stories, but they'll sometimes say it in different ways. For example, there's First and Second Kings, and then there's First and Second Chronicles. And those books were written before exile and after exile. And so they had different perspectives on the exact same kings, on the exact same situations. Some of them are going to be seen in a little bit more of a positive light, whereas later they're going to be seen in more of a negative light. And so it's this question, does it contradict itself? Or we get into the New Testament, right? We have 4 accounts of the story of Jesus, all right? None of them look the exact same. They all start at different places. They all showcase different ones of his miracles, and some of them explain the miracles a little bit differently or the parables differently. And so this is where people are going to say, does the Bible contradict itself? And so, for example, let's look at the resurrection of Jesus, right? So with Easter being this weekend, I felt like this was a really fitting one. What's cool is the book that we're using for this actually goes through it. So let's just ask a few questions here. So at Jesus' resurrection, it starts with people going to the tomb, right? So the woman who came to the tomb, different in each book. Matthew, it says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Luke says Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, and Joanna. John says only Mary Magdalene. The tomb's entrance stone. Matthew says an angel appeared and rolled it away. Mark says the stone already had been moved. Luke says the stone already had been moved. And John said the stone already had been moved. An angelic appearance. Matthew says dressed in white like lightning. Mark, young man dressed in white. Luke, 2 men like lightning. John, 2 angels in white. And then how did they feel when they saw this, right? In Matthew it says that the woman felt afraid but with great joy. Mark says astonished and afraid, run away. Luke says frightened. John says Mary doesn't seem afraid. So when we look at this, immediately there's a few of those that are literally contradict themselves, right? It's like John's like, she's not afraid. But the other 3 writers were like, nah, dude, she was scared. And so we have to say, does that mean the Bible's contradicting itself? And so with that, we're going to jump into a few different reasons why it could or could not be contradiction. One of the first biggest ones is perspective, right? Why do you think it's different? And so with that, when we look at perspective, we all see the situation differently based on emotions, timing, placement. So for example, if I'm on the left side of the room, I'm seeing the left side of everything. Okay, so it may look like somebody else is initiating conversation. Then if I'm on the right side of the room and they're seeing a different perspective from it, right? On top of that, am I angry? Am I sad? How do I feel when I'm experiencing this? On top of all that, what's the timing of it? Am I jumping in right at the very beginning? Did I jump in the middle? Did I miss the whole thing? And am I hearing this from somebody else? And with the Gospels, we have all these different perspectives, right? Because we have to look at like Matthew, who was a first-hand account, but he wasn't there at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He was called during the ministry. Or we look at John. John was there for the entire thing. But then we go and we look at Luke. Luke wasn't even there. He's getting his story, a mixture from Peter and from Paul. And so with that in mind, these are really different perspectives, right? Each perspective is very different. And so with that, it can look like it's contradicting, but all it is they're seeing it from a different vantage point. And regardless, the basic truth is still there. And when I say basic truth, a lot of you are like, yeah, but she was afraid and then she wasn't afraid. The basic truth is that the stone was rolled away and that Jesus rose from the grave. That's the truth. The absolute truth that is there is that Jesus came back. And so we look at that passage, all 4 passages admit to that fact. Now, did the people stumbling across the first time look a little bit different in each passage? Yes. Were any of those people the writers of those Gospels? No. Right? So we're getting different circumstances, different situations slightly from the different perspectives that are being given, right? Next, we have this idea of inerrancy and infallibility. And so when we're looking at the Bible, the church, it's kind of split on which one of these to follow, right? And so with that in mind, you might lean to one side, you might lean to the other, but what are these? And so I'm going to have to look at this notes a little harder. So with inerrancy, right, it means that the Bible is inspired, thus all facts are true, even if they seem to contradict one another. And then there's infallibility, which means the Bible is inspired, but some facts may be skewed, or may seem skewed, but the message and truth are still intact, but due to human error, there are some places where it's worded differently. One of the biggest things that we're looking at this is we have to remember this idea of translation. Was the Bible written in English, in the English that we read it in today? No. It was written in, Old Testament Hebrew, New Testament is written in Greek, there's even some Aramaic in there. The biggest thing is it was not written in our language, and it's written in languages that are a little bit harder to translate because of how long they have not been in use, right? And so with that in mind, is the Bible inerrant? Is the Bible infallible? Regardless of which way you look at it, again, these are both very common perspectives for the church to hold. Regardless of which way you look at it, it gives room for this idea that humans are the ones writing it. Yes, it is God-inspired, but humans are the ones writing it. We have to remember that, right? We have to remember the fact that there's always going to be that absolute truth there. And when we're looking at the original manuscripts, to say that it's anything but inerrant would be false. But when we look at translations, we understand that sometimes things get translated differently. Look at how many different versions of the Bible are out there. And so do we still hold to the infallibility that the truths are still held through? Yes. But are there times when some of the details may look a little differently? Yeah. And is that okay? Yes. Because again, perspective, right? And this next piece, let's talk about audience. So when you're writing, right, who are you writing to? Who were these people writing to when they were writing these books? Right? And so when we're looking at the New Testament, a lot of these are actually letters that were given to different churches or people. For example, John, his whole gospel was actually more of a letter to the Gentile population that was opening the door saying, hey guys, by the way, you're invited into this too now, because originally it was just for the Israelites or the Jewish people, right? Then you got Luke's perspective. Luke, or his audience, when he's writing to one specific person who happens to be a very philosophically minded person, a smart, educated man. And so he's giving this almost doctoral style paper for him to read versus John's, which is a little bit more easy with the go with the flow style. Here, guys, I want you to know this versus No, you need all of these facts, right? And so we'll see some differences in their gospels just from that. Again, it's the idea of this audience. And so when we look at the different books of the Bible, we have to remember, who were they writing to? What was the purpose of them writing, right? And so with Luke, he's trying to tell this educated man the story of Jesus. With John, he's talking to a bunch of people who range in the spectrum, and some of them probably aren't even educated at all, and so they're literally just hearing this from word of mouth. So the easier it is for him, easier it is written out, the easier it is for these people to communicate it and for people to hear it, right? And so with that, the perspective is going to look a little differently, right? The content's going to look a little different. One doesn't need as much detail. One needs all the detail. One has to focus on very specific details like Jesus and the love aspect and the openness and the kindness aspect, whereas the other one wants to look at the straight facts of Jesus and be able to open the door to everything that he has to say. And so it's going to look a little bit differently, right? And so these are just some of the ways that it can look like the Bible's contradicting itself, where again, it's not contradictory. It looks contradictory because we have to remember that there were so many writers. There were so many books in the Bible. And with different writers for each of these books, it can make it look like we're not in agreement. But what's actually happening here is that we're seeing different perspectives. And then through translation, we can lose some of the more specific details. And so it can look a little more skewed, right? And so with that, I'm going to hop into 2 Corinthians 3, verses 2 through 4. So starting in verse 2, again, 2 Corinthians 3. You yourselves are our letter of recommendation, written on our hearts to be known and read by all. And you show that you are a letter from Christ, delivered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Such is the confidence that we have through Christ toward God. So with this in mind, guys, it's this idea that we're the letter of recommendation. We living out what it means, what the basic truths are of the Bible, living out what it is, what the Bible is preaching, what it's teaching, what is there in writing. By us living it out, we are literally living letters, if you will. Okay, continuing the story of the Bible. And so with that in mind, it's him saying that, like, look, we're not written with ink, we're written with the Spirit. Christ in us, Christ in us is continuing this idea of we are still this God-breathed scripture. And I know that sounds really weird, okay? But the idea here is that because we understand the truth, because we know the truth, because we can adhere to the truths of the Bible, and we can live those out and act those out, people will see that, right? And so from there, they will see these basic truths, and when they say, hey, there's a contradiction, be like, these are the reasons why. Look at perspective, look at audience, look at inerrancy in the original translation, look at the infallibility of the translations that follow, right? And then from there we can say, look at us and say, these basic truths, do you not see us living them out? And from there we can see that it may look like the Bible is contradicting itself, but it doesn't mean it is. And so it's like this idea that we are the word living on through how we tell the stories of the Bible and of Jesus. And are we credible? Do we live in a way that they can see us as credible? Again, remember that there is humanness to it. And so there's going to be times where we fail. And being able to admit that is honestly part of it. And so from there, guys, I'm going to ask it again. Does the Bible contradict itself? Oh yeah, there's nobody in here, it's just me. Well, no, right? It doesn't contradict itself. It can appear to, but it doesn't mean that it does contradict itself. And even in translation, it may even more so appear so. More so appear. Even in translation, it may look more like it, but it doesn't mean that it does. And so the thing is this, we have to be prepared to answer these questions, both for ourselves and for the friends and others around us who are going to ask and have doubts, or ask and be attacking, if you will, saying, why would you believe in something that obviously contradicts itself, right? And being able to say, it doesn't. And being able to say, have you looked at who wrote it? Have you looked at the audience? Have you looked at different perspectives? Have you looked at the fact that it's human written and God inspired, right? And so from there, there's also with that the idea of translation errors. Have you looked? Do you know Hebrew? Can you read the original Hebrew? I don't think so. I can't. I think Nate might be able to, but I can't. And so with that in mind, right? It's not that the Bible contradicts itself. It's that each of these can add to the confusion to make it seem as if it does. And so, is it really contradicting? I think not. I I think the biggest thing is the same as when people tell stories, right? So, for example, how many of you guys tell your stories to both your friend groups, your parents, and the people at church? And each time you tell it, you have to tell a little bit differently because there's certain details you don't want them to know. For example, if I went out with friends and there was some not so great stuff going on, when I'm telling other friends, I'd probably tell the whole story. When I'm telling my parents, I might leave out the not so great stuff. When I'm with my church people, I'd hope you tell me the whole story, but let's be real, you're gonna leave out the not so great stuff, right? And so with that in mind, when we do that, it's still the same story. The basic truth is still there. We're just leaving out or changing some of the or like not changing, but leaving out some of the details in order to appease the audience. And so in the same way, right, the biblical writers had to keep the audiences in mind. They had to keep their perspectives in mind, right? So in keeping these things in mind, it's not contradicting. And if anything, it sheds light on the truth. Why? Because we can actually see the different perspectives. Because there's actually still this humanness to the text that shows that it's not just some copy paste of this is what I want you to tell your people, but instead it was, here's my truth. Tell it through your lens. Here's the truth that you need to tell. Tell it through your lens. What's your perspective on this? Tell them this truth. And so this idea that it's very much God inspired while still being written by the human writers. And I think with that it gives us confidence both in God's word and in God himself, right? This idea that it gives us confidence because we can trust his word because it doesn't contradict itself, but also confidence in him because he allowed us to be vessels for that. And so with that in mind, guys, I just want to end with saying it's awesome to know that we can trust the Bible, and it's even awesomer to know that it within itself it doesn't contradict itself. And I think that adds to the whole, can we trust it? Even more so. Guys, I am so excited for when we actually get to gather again. You guys are troopers for keeping with me with this. I really hope that the website is useful to you guys. I hope you guys are able to use the different devotions, watch these different teaching videos, and get a lot out of it. Guys, I'm praying for you, and I miss you like crazy. Have a great week.